Allora, se siamo tutti, if we're all here today, Fuchsia, why don't you sit down?
Wherever you want.
Fuchsia, are you going to join us?
Yeah, no, I was going to take a picture.
Okay.
Thank you, Pupia. Nice ex-colleague.
All right. So I believe we can begin. Let me turn off the phone. It's a busy news day,
Yes.
as it should be, in the Trump presidency. And funny we should discuss a president or begin by talking to the busy news day, because today we will be talking about the First Ladies. La First Lady degli Stati Uniti, e sono onorata davvero. I'm really honored to have here with me Anita McBride, who's a historian. She wrote the book on the First Lady. Remember the First Ladies, their legacy, and making history, the legacies of America, history-making ladies. We will talk about the book. We will discuss the book. I would like to ask her a few questions and open the floors to a few questions about First Ladies. But first, let me introduce to you l'Onorevole Bergamini, who will open the floor with remarks, institutional remarks. So we're very happy to have you here, Onorevole. La ringrazio.
Allora, buonasera a tutti. Ringrazio Maria Luisa. Saluto Anita, è una bellissima occasione questa qui di averla qui a Roma. Saluto la collega Laura Ravetto, che credo parlerà subito dopo di me. Il mio compito è intanto ringraziare Fuchsia per aver voluto ospitare qui alla sala stampa della Camera la presentazione italiana di questo volume. Credo che sia un bellissimo segnale e quindi mi fa piacere vedere tante persone e avere l'occasione un pochettino di ascoltarvi, di ascoltare Anita parlare delle First Ladies americane. Non nascondo che le First Ladies americane hanno nell'immaginario collettivo nostrano sempre un grande fascino. L'Italia, non lo so se si deve definire un paese provinciale perché è molto affascinata dalle vicende politiche americane. Io non credo, credo che sia semplicemente il rispetto per quella che è la più grande democrazia del mondo e quindi che ci sia attenzione. Dopodiché è chiaro che i poteri di un presidente degli Stati Uniti sono, rispetto alla struttura costituzionale del nostro paese, sono molto più grandi, sia di quelli del capo dello Stato italiano previsti dalla Costituzione che del Presidente del Consiglio. E quindi, insomma, intorno al Presidente degli Stati Uniti, alla coppia presidenziale, da sempre c'è un grandissimo interesse e c'è anche la giusta curiosità, perché si tratta di luoghi di potere che spesso vivono, e questo non lo descriviamo mai abbastanza, anche di dinamiche psicologiche. Dietro ogni scelta politica, anche la più importante, c'è sempre un quadro psicologico che noi non conosciamo, che noi ignoriamo e che è fatto delle normali dinamiche fra le persone. Figuriamoci tra marito e moglie. E quindi è chiaro che avere un libro che racconta tante dinamiche alle spalle di scelte che di fatto connotano la dimensione geopolitica del mondo da sempre, perché da sempre gli Stati Uniti sono il paese più potente al mondo, beh, io non vedo l'ora di leggerlo, devo dire la verità. È chiaro che poi questa considerazione si estende a un'altra considerazione, cioè al fatto che noi oggi ospitiamo la presentazione di questo libro in una Italia che per la prima volta ha una presidente donna e che quindi ha fatto un grande passaggio di immaginario, non soltanto un grande passaggio politico, ma un grande passaggio di immaginario sociale, perché noi viviamo di modelli, l'istinto di emulazione è l'istinto più potente dell'essere umano e avere dei modelli femminili che funzionano significa consentire alle nostre bambine, alle nostre ragazze di poter scegliere dei modelli che le ispirino, che non siano sempre i soliti, quelli un po' stereotipati che le generazioni che ci hanno preceduto hanno avuto e che erano pochi. È chiaro che per noi è una sfida, no? Chiedere, lo chiederei, ma sicuramente quando succederà che anche gli Stati Uniti, se c'è riuscita l'Italia, esprimeranno una donna alla presidenza degli Stati Uniti, no? Ci siamo andati vicini, ma ad oggi non è accaduto. Io sono sicura, vedendo quello che sta succedendo in un paese più piccolo come il nostro, che quello, quando avverrà, sarà un passaggio strepitoso e di una profondità che noi non riusciamo neppure a immaginare. Quindi io me lo auguro, ma mi auguro che quando toccherà a una donna che se l'ha guadagnato, che sarà capace più che mai, perché sappiamo che le donne devono essere più brave degli uomini. Il mondo si aspetta questo e quindi io mi auguro che sarà veramente una donna all'altezza del grande compito che l'aspetta. Per ora noi impariamo dalle First Ladies, per ora noi esercitiamo la nostra curiosità su quanta influenza abbiano avuto Nancy Reagan piuttosto che Laura Bush, Eleanor Roosevelt, che è stata una grande cambiatrice di costumi, e fino ad arrivare alle First Ladies più recenti, naturalmente, Jill Biden che introduce il testo. È chiaro che io credo che queste donne, Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, è chiaro che queste donne, poi alcune di loro hanno anche raccontato apertamente, ho letto l'autobiografia per esempio di Michelle Obama e si capisce perfettamente da quel racconto quanto rilevante fosse per il Presidente degli Stati Uniti la presenza della moglie, il passato insieme, quante volte non si è visto evitare tanti errori grazie all'intervento di una First Lady. Quindi tutta una controstoria che probabilmente non conosceremmo mai se non ci fossero ricercatrici, studiose e autrici che studiano, si documentano e ci raccontano questa parte. Io penso che abbiano avuto un ruolo, ognuna di loro, solo con la loro personalità, perché poi un Presidente degli Stati Uniti prima di essere eletto ci deve arrivare fino lì, e ci arriva con una moglie. Quindi, ecco, quindi io credo che dietro la storia statunitense sicuramente ci sia una componente femminile che, anche se non è assurta al ruolo principale, ha comunque giocato un ruolo principale, ha fatto la storia, e il mio auspicio è che continuerà a farla, ma con qualche protagonismo in più.
Okay, I will try in English, but my English is not perfect because I've worked in US, but was many, many years ago. Now it's 20 years that I'm at the chamber, and unfortunately, no, I'm not speaking in English anymore. So I'm trying in English, and then if something is not good for me, I will tell in Italian, and then. First of all, I think that this is very important, and thanks Fuchsia for this, and Anita for this, because this is the possibility for us to rebuild this strict relationship between Italy and US. Italy and US are strictly linked. I had honestly also the idea when Fuchsia was in the chamber, because we usually were talking about the differences between the two countries. And I think that both the countries can really well interact. For example, when we talk about meritocracy, I've been working in US, and meritocracy there was really the rule. And so in Italy also we are trying to do this also when we speak about women, because in Italy we have the idea that women has to grow, has to reach further steps, but with merit. And this is the things that in US is already done. In Italy, we are trying. We have a great president that is a woman. We have many representatives in the parliament, but maybe in the market, we need to make some steps again, because we have not so many directors. I think about directors of newspaper, directors of banks. We need to improve. So this is, I mean, the discussion. But I think that within this discussion, there is another revolution, and it's a revolution brought by a book like this. The revolution is, okay, ladies, we need to improve. We need to take advantage of other roles, but we can also maintain the traditional roles, but a different perspective. I mean, this book says, okay, we are waiting for the first man. Am I waiting for the first man? I will be very happy that will be a president in US. But we are saying to our child, and I'm saying child because you have a child, she came with you at the White House, she understood from you, I have a child, 7 years old, is a daughter, she came at the chamber, but what I want to transmit to her, okay, you can be president, but you can also be a first lady. Because being a first lady doesn't mean that you are less. Being first lady is meaning that you are nearby the president, even if Jackie Kennedy, I know, she didn't want to be called First Lady, she wanted Mrs. President, okay, whenever, but you can deal with the different perspective of the presidency. Because sometimes the president has the responsibility to be the part of his party. I mean, sorry, maybe in Italian would be better, but just to represent the values of a party, represent the values of a community. The First Lady can be more, I don't know in English, it's transversal. In Italian, it's trasversale, dealing with things that can touch everybody without being necessarily on a particular political part. I'm thinking all the First Lady that dealt with education, for example. I mean, the First Lady that, like Michelle Obama, dealt with the feeding, the good food, etc. It seems, yeah, exercise, it seems that it's second-level issues. They are not. They are high-level issues, and sometimes the presidency is not in the possibility to deal with that without looking at this, you know, coupon of the party, and the First Lady can do this in a more open way. And also, I know that we had, tell me if it is true, but we had First Ladies that changed the Constitution. Because First Lady is not in the Constitution, but a First Lady changed the Constitution because she had an impact on the vote in US for women. So maybe I will be happy for the future to have the first man, but also to have the First Lady in the Constitution. Because now it's changed so much during the years that probably this role is really a critical role to have a person, maybe a first man, I don't know, a person dealing with issues that not always the president can deal with. And with a perspective that is different from a presidency. So thanks for this book. Thanks especially for the book of your daughter, because I will give to Clarissa, because Deborah is right. We need model role, and this is our perfect model role. So sorry for the English. I think that she has to make the same question. Who haven't understood my English? And I can repeat in Italian. University. So I will consider you an academic, a scholar, a good friend, and a fabulous author.
Thank you.
So in light of this, in light of the 67 countries that you have taken, Laura Bush, tell us a little bit about what it's like to run
an office
for the First Lady. But there are mysteries about the White House.
Sure.
And we know the Oval Office, we go to the Oval Office, but what happens
Over on the other side.
On the other side of the West Wing?
That's the most interesting place.
I think a lot of people would like to know.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about your favorite
Sure.
First Ladies, and you'll tell us about
Sure.
your book. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you to Fucsia for organizing this, for reaching out to me, saying you're coming to Italy on the National Italian American Foundation annual mission trip. We're here in the beautiful Lazio region this year. And she said, would you like to present your book? I look for any opportunity to share the stories of First Ladies. I want to thank both of you for you really either read the book or you've researched beautifully, you understand, you described, both of you, how multifaceted this role is, from being a wife and mother first, in addition to having these opportunities to have impact on public policy. but also at the global diplomacy role that they are responsible for, the fact that they really do have such an impact on our culture. I had such an opportunity. I had a front row seat to history, not one time, not twice, but 3 times in 3 different administrations. The Reagan administration, where I got started right after President Reagan won in 1981. And then I worked for the father Bush, George H.W. Bush. I saw Barbara Bush in this role. But then coming back to the White House in the administration of George W. Bush and being asked to be Laura Bush's chief of staff is it's not a position that you apply for. There's not an application for it. You get appointed. I was asked. In fact, I got, I had already been working for George W. Bush on the White House side, on the West Wing side. I lived through 9/11 and all the changes that we had to make to the White House after that. And then I went to work to the State Department. I worked for Secretary Powell. That's where I got very involved in the U.S.-Afghan Women's Council. But after George W. Bush won re-election in 2004, Mrs. Bush was looking to get a new chief of staff because her chief of staff for the first term, who was from Texas, who was with her in Texas when she was First Lady of Texas, she wanted to go back home. Her chief of staff wanted to go back to Texas. So Mrs. Bush needed a new chief of staff. I literally got a phone call from the White House operator when I was picking up my children from school. And it was the White House operator saying that, right, exactly, saying that Mrs. Bush's office was on the phone and wanted to talk to you. So I accepted the call, of course, was invited to come meet with Mrs. Bush at the White House in the residence. We met for an hour and a half, and she talked to me about her vision for the second term, what she wanted to do. And one of the first things she said to me was, I want to go to Afghanistan. She had been working with Afghan women, supporting them since the War on Terror in 2001, but she had been very frustrated that she had never been able to visit there. And so I thought to myself immediately, this is going to be a very different position than what I had understood in the past about a chief of staff role for the First Lady. You manage some domestic issues, you manage all the social events at the White House. It is a really interesting role, but that told me Laura Bush had a different vision for how she wanted to act in the second term.
Anita, a high-ranking, very high-ranking official at the UN told me several times that Laura Bush, and then we'll talk about the other First Ladies. A very high-ranking UN official, still in charge at the UN, told me that several times Mrs. Bush, Laura Bush, called up the Secretary General to push, to ask, to advocate for Afghani women. Were you the woman making the calls, or were you the woman behind the phone?
Helping to set up the calls, for sure. She also got very involved with the UN on issues related to Myanmar and Burma, and made a very historic trip to the refugee camps on the border between Burma and Thailand. And that was a trip that I did organize and I did arrange, and I was working with the UN on that. But yes, you know what, but here's the interesting thing about Laura Bush. She was not the loudest voice in the room, but she was very effective. She had a quiet way on how she did her work. And one of the things that she told me in the interview, which was really important, was she said, I'm not here for me. I'm here for George and because of George, meaning that she's not the elected official. He is. It's his administration, his policies, but where she could use her background, her experience to help, that's what she wanted to do.
How powerful are First Ladies, and how powerful First Ladies have been throughout history? I mean, we all know about Martha Washington. She brought the money. She brought the wherewithal. She brought
She supported the revolutionary troops. She did.
We call them corporate skills at this point. And then there was Eleanor Roosevelt with her very difficult life, I would say, and going through, I guess,
the infidelities.
And infidelities, tough life. Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama, Jill Biden. How powerful are they? And how do they manifest their power?
Well, this is an interesting question, and you alluded to the Constitution. And this is really important to understand about United States history and how we developed as a nation, which we're slow in some aspects. You already have a female head of government here. We're not there yet. We came close, but we're not there yet. But how has the role of women evolved over the history of our country, which is a theme in this book, on how First Ladies have been able to adapt to the changing role of women. So back to the Constitution. There are only 35 words in the United States Constitution for the President's oath of office. 35 words, not very many. But there is not one word about the First Lady and what her role is or should be, because there is no constitutional authority. And the title of this book, Remember the First Ladies, is taken directly from our second First Lady, Abigail Adams, who told her husband when he was writing the Constitution to remember the ladies, be better to them than your ancestors had been, include them in the forming of the nation. It was 133 years before the Constitution was amended for women to have the right to vote. And First Lady Florence Harding was a proponent, a champion, and the first First Lady to actually vote for a president, which happened to be her husband. So it's a slow evolutionary process, but the important thing to remember is as the role of women has changed in society, how these women who are seen as leaders, how they have helped to push the nation forward, how they adapted, or maybe where they retreated. There are some who did not feel comfortable with a public role in public life and preferred to be the wives, the mothers, or work behind the scenes. So again, it's a revolutionary process, but modern First Ladies, we have really come to expect that they use that position for something valuable that helps the nation, helps people either at home or around the world. And so that's it. And I would have to, Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, really helped to change the view of what a First Lady could do. She also had 12 years to do the job, right? There were 4 terms that her husband was elected. He didn't serve all 4, of course, but she was extremely active. And she also did not want to be First Lady. She worried the role would limit her, because before she came to the White House, she was a public speaker. She made money as a journalist. She wrote articles. She had a radio show. She was making, she was very active in politics. And her husband did not want her to have a public role as First Lady. It was very, very difficult for her. But she pushed up against it and changed really the model of a First Lady and how we expect them to use the position.
And that's the question I was going to ask. When did the role of the First Lady change from being public, a private figure, public confidant, or vice versa? When did the role of the First Lady really change, and who do you think broke the ground on that?
Well, certainly in the 20th century, Eleanor Roosevelt definitely did. When we get to more modern times, of course, and you have women who are coming into this role who had jobs, like Hillary Clinton before she became First Lady. She was First Lady of her state, of course, but she was a partner in a law firm. She was highly skilled in a domestic issue, health care reform, children's issues, and she was also a new generation now, right? Because the women who preceded her were the women of the World War II generation: Barbara Bush, Nancy Reagan, Rosalind Carter, Betty Ford, even though Betty Ford was an activist and really did use her voice to push for the Equal Rights Amendment for women. Her husband's advisors did not want her to do that because they felt politically it would damage his ability to run for president. But she did it anyway, and she helped to really change the narrative against a backdrop of a wave of feminism in the country and frankly around the world, but really in the United States, that had greater expectations for what women could do with their lives and move beyond being wives and mothers. So by the time Hillary Clinton gets there, is the first baby boomer first lady, highly educated, full-time employee. She was the breadwinner in their family. Bill Clinton never really made a dime worth anything. And so she comes into the role. He gives her a responsibility to run.
government, right.
He gives her health care reform to run, to manage one of the most complicated, most controversial domestic issues that we had seen up until that time, health care reform. And it failed. Why did it fail? Not because she wasn't skilled. She was very, very skilled. She knew the issues. But it was the way that it was managed. It was not transparent. It was behind closed doors. The American public was not prepared for her to have such a powerful role executing on policy where she was not elected to do. And in her own memoir, which was really interesting because I reread her own memoir, she said if she had to do it over again, she would not have accepted the position to run the initiative. She would have worked behind the scenes. She would have been an advocate. She would have helped support the players who could actually move the legislation forward. The other thing she said that she would not have done, she would never have put her office in the West Wing. She put her office in the president's domain. That sent a signal to the country that they were not ready for. Again, she was not the elected official. And after healthcare failed, she never used that office again. So it's just an example. My point to raise that is it's not that women don't have the skills, don't have the background, can't help the nation move forward on certain issues. It's the way that it's done. It's what the country is ready to accept or not.
And how do first ladies help the country? Because I think the
Yeah.
point of the book is the evolution
That's right.
of the figure of the first lady. How does the figure of a first lady from Martha to Eleanor to Nancy Reagan,
Yeah.
another fabulous,
Right.
interesting figure, and you describe her really well in your book. She was groundbreaking, just
Yes,
like
she
Hillary
was.
Clinton, but she was behind.
Right.
She was working behind the scenes. How does the first lady help evolve, I guess, the issue of the presidency, and how do
Yes.
they help preserve the role, but also advance the role of the first lady?
Well, there's no doubt that they are generally, throughout our history, first ladies have been the most important confidant of a president. It's the only advisor who really cannot get fired, right? They're married to them, they have their home, they have their husband, they have their family. They're a very different advisor. They can be honest. And Betty Ford, as she would say, that pillow talk is very, very valuable, where you're not publicly criticizing the president or telling them where they should do something different, but behind the scenes, you're really adding value. Nancy Reagan definitely was not afraid to speak her mind to her husband, but she also utilized some pretty significant authority over personnel
too.
decisions. And then, of course, on the global platform, she did, because she really believed her husband could do something great and that he could really transform and change the world. She did not care about her own personal reputation. She didn't care about her own publicity. If she had, she might have done things differently. Nancy Reagan had a terrible first year. Terrible first year. She did things that were unpopular, spending a lot of money on things in the White House, even though it was not taxpayer money, it was private money from the White House Historical Association. But the country was going through a recession, right? The country was going through a recession, and to buy China for the White House, people did not understand why would you do that. So she had to and then her husband was almost assassinated. And that, she never overcame that fear. She said every night she went to bed, she looked at her husband, she could never get the images out of her mind of when he was laying in the hospital almost dying. But she used her position behind the scenes. She had impact on personnel. She had impact on his legacy, no doubt about it. She felt he could be a bridge builder. She pushed out some of the people that worked around him that were much more aggressive vis-a-vis the Soviet Union, where she felt he should have more dialogue and really worked hard to do that
She was a
behind the
full-fledged
scenes.
advisor to the
She
president.
100% she was. Like Harry Truman, who never made a decision without consulting with Bess Truman, a first lady you hear almost nothing about, but she was highly influential, and Nancy Reagan was the same way.
To your knowledge, Anita, and then I'd like to open
Yes,
to the floor to questions, because this is fascinating to me. I'm the U.S.
And I
correspondent
wish I
for
could
Mediaset,
do
so I
it
work
in
at the White House.
Italian. I'm sorry for people
We
that are
will,
not getting
do you
it
want
in
me to
Italian.
translate? Because this is
Maybe
really
some of the,
fascinating.
you're
I will.
okay? Anybody?
Are you all
You're
good
okay?
with the English?
Okay.
I think so.
okay,
I
thank
recognize
you,
this
'cause
crowd,
I feel
so they're all.
I speak a little bit, not enough to go through
Anita,
the technical
Anita,
things.
may I say, you
Okay.
speak perfect English, perfect English,
Thank you.
wonderful Italian, but,
Okay,
and I'm sure
thank
you
you.
could carry this
I
conversation in
appreciate
Italian.
Yes.
However, to make it,
Yes,
I guess, more
thank you.
fluid,
Yes,
we might
I appreciate
go on
yours
with,
doing that.
with English. Do all the first ladies get that pillow talk? Because there's been talk about
Good
first
question.
ladies. I don't want to talk about infidelities because this
Yes.
is not a gossip session,
Right.
but there are some rough patches in
Right.
in
Yes.
any marriage, and
Sure.
so there should be, or there are,
Sure.
with First Lady and the President.
Yes.
Do they all get that pillow talk? Do they all get that influence? Do they all
Well-
get to have the last word on the President?
That's a very good question, and of course, you brought up the example earlier of Eleanor Roosevelt, who had a very difficult marriage with her. You know, she had discovered that he was unfaithful to her before he came to the White House. It's while he was, serving as governor of New York, and she wanted to leave him. And it was Franklin Roosevelt's mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, who was very, very strong, who told her son, if she leaves you, you will never have a future in politics, and really forced the two of them to stay together, but not without, some concessions. And that was for her to have a public life of her own. And so she did become extremely important to his presidency. She was his eyes and ears. She traveled for him. She was his legs because he was paralyzed. Most Americans didn't know at the time. It was hidden that he was in a wheelchair and was very, had paralysis from polio. But so she became extremely influential, but she did it on her terms. But they led separate lives. They really did lead separate lives. So that is one example.
What about some modern First Ladies that you might think have had a difficult time with their spouses?
Listen,
and,
Jacqueline Kennedy. Jackie
Kennedy.
Kennedy knew how.
Another
That's why
pivotal First Lady.
she was very pivotal First Lady, has left a legacy of her own. She chose an issue of historic preservation, the founding of the Historical Association, because she knew there would never be enough government money to maintain the White House in the museum quality that it deserved. Her husband did not want her to work on historic preservation. He felt the perception that it was an elitist issue to be involved in, and most Americans would not connect with it at all. But she found a way to protect, herself and her interests, while her husband really deeply hurt her heart with his infidelities that she knew about. It was not really in the public. She would often leave the White House. She'd go to Virginia. She'd ride her horses. She'd travel. She came to Italy numerous times. She went traveling with her sister. It wasn't until really the summer of 1963, after they had lost, another child, where they really started to become close again. And then, as we know, his final foreign trip was to this country, was in Italy. And he said, I'm going to come back here with Jackie. And of course, then he died. He was assassinated. But she found a way to protect herself, her interests, protect her children. She did not want her children to be publicized. Whenever she traveled, though, the president found ways to get them photographed because he knew, and there's so many iconic photos, he knew the American people wanted to connect with a young first family. So so that's an example of modern times that was quite difficult, but the press protected it. It was not widely known.
And is it different now? The press sometimes protects, in the case of
Yes.
Jill Biden, and I do not, the preface of this book
Sure.
is by Jill Biden,
Yeah.
and I recommend anyone to read it because she is the ultimate, I think, example of the quintessential First Lady living in modern times.
She did.
But handling a very traditional role.
And
she
she-
was the gatekeeper of this of the Biden
yes,
presidency.
she was, and she also, but what she did that was really interesting in moving the model forward on First Ladies is she was the first to have a job outside the White House.
Dr. Biden.
As a teacher, which is why she agreed to write the foreword for the textbook, because it was the first, the textbook that we did that came before this was the first textbook ever in our country, anywhere actually, on First Ladies. And she agreed to write it because she was a professor and she was a First Lady. And her voice really added a lot of value and validity to us doing it. But so she helped to move the model forward. That is a modern view of the role, for sure. She also, right now in our country, there's a huge debate going on as to how influential and powerful that her role was, as there are questions daily about President Biden's cognitive ability in the time that he was serving, as president, especially in the last couple of years. And there's no way people feel that a family, a couple that is that close, and they are very, very close, loving couple, that she could not know. So it's a debate that's going on right now. Books are being written. It's going to be obviously very difficult for the family to deal with that and push back against it. But you can understand why those questions are there. So she doesn't come close to what Edith Wilson did. President Woodrow Wilson, who had a stroke in 1917, for 17 months. 17 months, the Cabinet of the United States did not see the President of the United States, not once. One member of Congress did. The Vice President saw him once. Mrs. Wilson controlled all access to the President, every document that came in and went out. In her memoir, she disputes that. She said she did not do that, but there is absolutely no way that that's not true. That was an extraordinary overreach of power. Ultimately, in talking about the Constitution again, our Constitution was amended for the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, which dictates if a president is incapacitated, that the position goes to the vice president, or if the vice president is incapacitated, it goes to the next in line, which is the Speaker of the House. Mrs. Wilson's actions contributed greatly to a change in our Constitution, not by her choice, but ultimately, by necessity, by her actions.
By her actions that at the time were hidden by lack of
That were
social
hidden.
media,
Right,
or
right.
lack of complacent media,
Right.
if we want to call it. But
Right.
times are very different. I have so many questions,
Sure,
but I have
yeah.
to
And I'll try
open
and
the
be
floor.
shorter in my
No,
answers.
it's fascinating because this is not only history. This shows us the
Yeah.
segue. First Lady to the most, I guess, modern First
Yes.
Lady of all that completed her term, Joe Biden. I need to ask about Melania Trump.
Yes, absolutely. Let's talk
Melania
about
Trump,
Mrs. Trump.
I believe, is one of the most prominent figures in American, I wouldn't say politics, but she's very influential on her own, far more popular than her husband in her first term.
And first ladies usually are. More popular than their husbands.
And they help out,
Yes,
too,
and they
right?
have power.
They help out the presidents to, I guess, put forth their agenda. How different is Melania Trump's first term, actually second term,
To the first.
to the first term? What do you see?
Great
We
questions.
can see it. But
Yes, of course, and I think the American people can see it too. There's a very different view and acceptance of her this time than there was the first time. My personal view on a couple of things. First of all, Mrs. Trump becomes the American First Lady in 2016 after only having been an American citizen for 10 years. This is not her first language. She's never been in politics. She's married to a highly controversial figure in our country and in our politics, and she's thrust into this situation. She has a young child who's still in school, and she makes a really important decision that she was criticized for, but actually was an example of how she helped to move the position of First Lady forward. And what's that decision? The decision to not move to the White House right away. No First Lady had done that really before in modern times. And her point was because she was going to wait for her son to get out of school. She took a lot of criticism for that. There were questions, is Ivanka Trump going to actually be the real First Lady? And Mrs. Trump doesn't really want to do it. That was not the case at all. What she did really was help to move the model forward for every First Lady, or if it's a man, occupant, but who does not want to come right away, move to the White House right away. She broke that ground for them. So that was precedent setting. I think things that she did do in the first term that she got very little credit for, speaking differently than her husband. I'm talking about COVID on several issues. COVID was one of them. When he was telling the American people from the Oval Office, you don't have to wear a mask, you don't have to social distance, Mrs. Trump was recording announcements for the media, for public service announcements on the front door of the White House, telling people to social distance, to wear a mask, to listen, you remember that? And she got no credit for doing that. She used her own position, her own influence, and normally, I can tell you, having worked in a White House, if a First Lady ever uttered a public word different than what the president's view was, it would be all over the news. And yet, she did it, and did it in something that she felt would help people, and got no coverage for it. So it shows you the bias that the media had towards her, because the reputation, the view of her husband spilled over onto her. She's not the only First Lady in history that has suffered that. Mary Lincoln sort of suffered, kind of poor treatment but those were her decisions, not her husband's decisions. But the second term, she comes back now, and first of all, she knows the house she's going to live in. She knows the staff that is there. She knows what she can do, doesn't have to do. She's got a familiarity. She's got more confidence about understanding the political role that she can have, what things that she could say no to or should do. She likes the traditional role of the White House. She was a wonderful person to work for the Historical Association, on how she cared about the architectural integrity of the White House, maintaining the museum quality of the White House. But she also has done something recently that I think she's getting a little credit for, not enough, but a little bit. On Inauguration Day, 2025, when Donald Trump's inaugurated for the second time, Mrs. Trump is sitting at the inaugural lunch next to the co-chair of the inauguration. And it's the Democratic senator from Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar. And Senator Klobuchar says to Mrs. Trump that there's an important piece of legislation in the Congress that was being stalled by the Senate. And it's on Inauguration Day. She's telling her this at lunch. Senator Klobuchar, to her credit, knew it'd be something Mrs. Trump would be interested in because of her focus on the Be Best initiative, children to online safety, health and wellness, safe use of the internet, and this was of social media. This was the legislation that was targeting all of this, the deep fake, the pornographic material on young people, taking it, using AI, that was really harmfully, affecting young people in particular. And this was an act to take it down. And Mrs. Trump really went to the Congress within a couple of months of being not even a First Lady, held a roundtable in the Congress with bipartisan members, House and Senate, and really was a driving force on that legislation getting passed. And I don't have to tell you what's happening in the United States Congress, that we can't get a lot done. We're fighting over our budget. We're fighting over everything. The fact that the First Lady of the United States used that information that she was given, coupled it with an area and an issue that she cares about, an initiative that she tried to launch the first time. Nobody would work with her the first time in the first term. Now they see the value of the First Lady's role, how she was able to work overtly and also behind the scenes. That legislation was passed by the Senate in record numbers and was signed by the president a few weeks ago. It should have her name on it for the impact that she had in getting that passed. And so that shows you the power that First Lady can have. I think she's going to be very driven by quality, not quantity. She doesn't have to be everywhere. It's interesting, when I interviewed Jill Biden for the book, I said, how do you see your role as First Lady? And she said she felt she was coming into the role at a period of time where the country had experienced great trauma. COVID, the election that was disputed, and that's right, it was the post-Trump administration.
This is how they depicted it, at least, yeah.
This is how they depicted it. There was a terrible collapse of a building in Florida. Many people died. It exposed issues of how things aren't regulated the way that they should be. She said, I feel like I don't need to choose one thing. I need to be where I'm needed. I need to go wherever I'm needed. That was her view. So it was she was a very event-driven First Lady. She did tons of events. I mean, I don't know how she managed the schedule, being a teacher and doing all the things that she was doing, managing things at home. I mean, it really was actually impressive. But at the end of the day, Mrs. Trump, going back to Mrs. Trump is not about quantity, and she's really about quality, picking and choosing a limited number of things where she feels she can have an impact on her terms.
And bringing a level of irony in the
Yes.
presidential discourse.
100%.
Mr. Trump, President Trump, and some of you know him very well and very personally, but dealing with him in the Oval Office, the kind of exchanges he has with press, even describing his marital condition, make him closer to press and to the people. And I think that her impact is so forceful on him and makes him, couldn't say if he's a better president for it, but definitely much closer to the public because of it. Because of what Melania says to him and what he refers the public as.
I think there's a lot of that. I think that I read, some excerpts from books of his advisors in his first campaign that said that after every speech he gave, the first person he called was
But he says it.
Melania
He
Trump.
says it constantly.
To get her view.
Melania
How
will
did
like
I
this.
do?
Melania will kill
Yeah.
me. And bring him.
So that
he says
doesn't
it all the
necessarily
time.
change his actions, right? But he's cognizant of her view.
But-
I think
but
that's real influence.
I see a lot of powerful women in this room, and I'm sitting next to them, 4 of them, 3 of them actually. But there's good friends, powerful
Right.
women. How many times has a man said, "Can't tell my wife," or they make jokes, or they discuss their personal position vis-a-vis what their wives represent? And the president does this now with Melania Trump, proving that they have a relationship that is misunderstood by the press, I believe, not portrayed correctly. And to your point, she is poignant and significant in a very different way,
Yes.
if you would agree.
Yes, no, I definitely do agree on that. And I think, listen, she knows what the platform is. She knows where she can have impact and have influence, and she's going to pick and choose it in her way. She made a very interesting statement after the election in November, and she said, I'll be defined by my own expectations, not others' expectations of me. And that sets a tone right there. And, she's her own person. And, she's changing the model, too. I mean, I have never seen a First Lady, a sitting First Lady, been able to do the kind of personal business enterprise projects that she is doing. The book, which is a profit-making entity, the film that Amazon Prime is doing about her, which was a significant contract of something over $40 million that she signed. It's just, it's unheard of. I'm really coming from an old view of politics. Here's an example. I remember working in the White House. I had a young staffer that worked for me who was not making enough money to live. So she was making little jewelry on the side that she was selling. Do you know, I got a call from the White House counsel's office saying she cannot do that. Nobody who's working at the White House can sell, anything. And so we've come a long way. All I can say is we're signing Amazon contracts for $40 million. I mean, that we've come a long way.
I have very few minutes. Does anyone want to ask a question? But the question that I have, who's your favorite First Lady?
Oh, my gosh. You know,
Certo, una bella
Okay,
domanda in italiano.
yes, okay.
Grazie, prego. Le ho
should I
chiesto-
answer who my
Sì,
favorite first
facciamo,
lady
allora,
is?
facciamo questa domanda in italiano, che non è una domanda accademica, non è decisamente una domanda che si fa a una
Sì.
storica, ma una persona che conosce il mondo delle First Ladies molto bene e soprattutto conosce, questo è il libro della dottoressa McBride, e conosce the intricacies, quello che c'è dietro il mondo delle First Ladies e che cosa rappresentano relativamente alla presidenza degli Stati Uniti. Qual è la sua preferita?
You're going to be surprised. Pat Nixon. Richard
Really?
Nixon's wife, Pat Nixon, turned out to be one of my favorites. And why? This woman, first of all, is the most traveled First Lady in our history, 81 countries, even one more than Hillary Clinton. She worked so hard to help advance the White House in significant ways. The first woman, the first First Lady to actually oversee a women's issues office. Nobody really knows that. She was pushing her husband to hire more senior women to senior positions in the U.S. government. Nobody really realized that either. She was the only First Lady to be given the formal title of personal representative of the president when traveling overseas. First Lady to address a foreign parliament. And then what she did for the American people at the White House. This is the first, time that the White House was lit at night so people could see it. That tours were at night so that more working women were going into the workforce, can tour the White House. The tours for the blind, the garden tours, things that opened up the White House to the American people, she was really responsible for. More artifacts, more historical restorations were done under Pat Nixon than even Jackie Kennedy. And again, most people don't know about it. Why? Because her husband was so controversial, left in a scandal, and so everything that she contributed as second lady, because she was second lady for 8 years, in fact, so good at being a diplomat that President Eisenhower would tell Vice President Nixon, take Pat Nixon with you when you travel, because she was such a much better personality than he was. So all these things that she did behind the scenes, but again, the difficulty for her, she's a woman of the 70s, at the feminist movement, the women of that era never really accepted her. And so she was not really given credit for the contributions that she made behind the scenes, but also to the White House and elsewhere. And when she died, her husband collapsed in tears over her coffin because he recognized that she never got the recognition she deserved because of him.
And that's why we
Yes.
need to read this book. And we have to go, but that's why we need to read this book, because there's so much about First Ladies we don't know.
Yes.
So much of these First Ladies, all of the First Ladies, we need to know. And I
Thank
think it's
you.
going to help us understand
Thank you.
the world, even the presidential world, much better.
I think so.
I
But
thank you so much.
This is for you.
Oh, thank you.
And then anybody, you can tell people, anybody that has,
Do you wanna talk a little bit about
children-
this
Sure, I can
children's
just
book?
show you this. This is a children's book that's adapted that I wrote with my daughter about First Ladies. And it is the Italian Embassy in Washington took the rights of the book and translated it into Italian. So this is in Italian. This is for children from elementary school. I have 10, 11 copies. Anybody that would like it, please, they're for you. So
Quindi
you
sono
can
i
take
libri
them.
scritti dalla figlia, naturalmente.
In italiano.
In italiano.
Take it.
In italiano.
Thank you.
Perfetto.
Thank you.
Perfetto.
You're welcome.
E grazie a tutti per essere intervenuti in
Thank
questa
you.
giornata very busy per tutti.
Thank
Per
you.
tutti e grazie ad Anita.
Can I recognize here the Consul General from Naples, the United States Consul
Eccola.
General from Naples,
Of course.
Tracy Robert Pounds, who came. Thank you for
Sure.
coming up to
Thank
be
you.
here. I appreciate
Thank you
it
for
so
being here.
much. We got a picture with you.
You'll take a
Thank
picture with
yes,
the Consul
I would-
General,
yes,
and I'm
I
very
do.
honored
Yes.
to have held this talk with you.
Thank you.